We have an exciting talk in store for everyone. So at this point, I'd like to invite Honors College Dean, Dr. Skinner, to introduce our Chess Educator honoree.
Thank you, Julio. You know, one of the things that really attracted me to UTD in the first place was, you know, we don't have a football team, we have a chess team. And you all really, really impress me. I kind of look at UTD as a place where we produce academic quarterbacks, and none more so than chess. So it really is a great pleasure for me to introduce here today USCF Master Ben Johnson, author and host of the popular Perpetual Chess podcast. And he is the 2024 University of Texas at Dallas Chess Educator of the Year. Ben will speak shortly on the topic Common Traits of Adult Amateurs Who Show Significant Chess Improvement. And Ben started his podcast in 2016, and it has since amassed more than 5 million listens from across the world. He recently published New in Chess, Perpetual Chess Improvement, his first book. He's a Philadelphia native and Pomona College graduate. Ben played chess for the Julia R. Masterman School and has coached for chess in the Schools and Kids Chess Network in New York City, and later for the Pittsburgh Chess Club, as well as running his own scholastic programs in Pittsburgh and in New Jersey. On his podcast, Ben has interviewed players and content creators alike, including Fabiano Caruana, Judith Polgar, and Vishwanthan Anand. His Adult Improver series spotlights amateurs devoted to pursuing chess as a hobby. New in Chess, Perpetual Chess Improvement synthesizes chess improvement advice from trainers, players, and accomplished amateurs. He plans to release a Chessable course in early 2024. In the 20 prior years, we have never had a chess podcaster as an honoree. This continues our tradition of spotlighting someone different every year. So without further ado, welcome. And I like your socks.
Yeah, I've got the chess socks working, finally an occasion for them. So thanks so much. I'm truly honored to be here. Thank you to everyone from the UTD team, Grandmaster Sadora and Tim Steiner and Jim Stallings and Dr. Alexei Roux. Obviously, Jim couldn't be here, but we know he'll get well soon. And thanks to you all for coming. I'm a big fan of what UTD does. You know, there's a lot of common themes that come up in talking for an hour about some aspect of chess every week for 6+ years. But one of them is sort of the connective tissue that chess has, the ability to bring people together throughout the globe. And when I look at the roster of the UTD chess team, in addition to how amazing you guys all are at chess, it's amazing to see so many people brought together, and it's an incredible opportunity, as you guys well know, for the course of your lives to be changed through this either discounted or free education and opportunity to get an education in a different country. So, I mean, it's stories like yours that I love to share. Can't share every story in the chess world, but slowly but surely, I'm 6 years in. I hope to keep doing this for another 20 years. So maybe eventually I'll share them all. So just to touch a little bit more about the background of the podcast before we get into the topic of the main topic of the lecture. Wanted to get in a little bit, and first we'll start with a little bit of background about the podcast, then we'll talk about some common themes on the podcast, which I guess you could call kind of other topics I could have talked about. Then we'll get into the primary topic of the lecture, which will be adult improvement, how adults can get better at chess. I know a lot of you here are 18 to 22, so you guys are still in the golden years. You've got great opportunities. I know you're busy with school, but you've also got great opportunities to improve in chess. But as I'll talk about, as the sort of discourse on my podcast, which is really a community endeavor, as it's evolved, I've determined that that's something that as you get older and as you still have a love for chess, it's something that people are very passionate about and have a lot of interest in. So after talking about that topic a bit more broadly, I'll zero in on what I think are, first of all, it's very hard to get better at chess as you get older, but I have interviewed a lot of people who've been successful at it, so I'll highlight what I think are to be some of the most successful traits. And in addition to being a general fan of what UTD's chess program is doing, I also just want to quickly mention I'm a big fan of the Chess Educator of the Year series in particular. I've interviewed many of the prior winners. I have personal relationships with some of the prior winners. Like I trained as a teacher under Elizabeth Spiegel and David McAnulty in New York City many years ago. Not that long ago, interviewed Gerald Times, who I know won recently, and even people I haven't had the opportunity to interview, like Jim Bullington, I'm a big fan of, and Andy Soltis, the list goes on. So you guys have great taste in who you select, and part of the reason I decided to focus on the adult improvement aspect of perpetual chess is because in looking at what had been discussed before on this podcast, that is a theme that had not yet been hit. So even though I know for you youngsters here in the audience, it's not your primary issue yet, trust me, Father Time comes for us all, so sooner or later you'll be thinking back on this topic. And in the meantime, I do remember my college years, and I know it was exciting to get some free food. So I'm glad that you guys were able to get some delicious food out there in the hall as well. So a little bit more about Perpetual Chess, launched in 2016. Over 50 to 60 episodes a year. At this point, I've done like 400 episodes, been listened to in over 100 countries. In the introduction, they mentioned a few of the people I've interviewed, also Nakamura, Judith Polgar. I also interview creators like Gotham Chess, Agad Mater, many others. I mean, a lot of my favorite interviews are not necessarily with like household chess names, but people who just sort of rank and file, I guess you could say, chess professionals who've just accumulated some great stories and life experiences along the way. So we'll do a Q&A at the end of this. Don't ask me what my favorite episode is because I'll just stammer for 10 minutes and won't give you a definitive answer. Don't ask me when I'm going to interview Magnus. I'm available for Magnus, but so far he's proved to be the trickiest guest to nail down. So, common themes on perpetual chess. The goal of the podcast is really to cover chess from all angles. Any way that chess could touch someone's life, hopefully those stories sooner or later will get told on perpetual chess. So we'll start here with chess business, which is not the most common theme, but it does come up periodically. I recently had the opportunity to interview the CEO of chess.com, Eric Albest. So in an interview like that, we're going to get into a lot of the nitty-gritty, them buying Chess24, what they're doing in terms of trying to combat cheating, what his thoughts are in terms of like event planning, and stuff like that I find fascinating. I also interviewed Rex Singfeld some years ago. So every once in a while, get to talk to someone who had some success in the business world or is doing something to promote chess as sort of a public-facing entity. Those, again, not the most common interviews, but they are fun for me when I get a chance to do them. I also have a separate series of book reviews. I do that partially just because I love chess books. Players from my generation, I'm in my 40s, that was the main way to get better back in those days. And you know, there's just a big common thread between people who love chess and people who love books. So those tend not to be my most popular episodes, but they really resonate with the people who tune in. And you know, I've gotten to talk about and really dig into so many of the best chess books of all time, like My 60 Memorable Games by Fischer, Zurich 1953, all of my system, which I actually don't like as much, and all of the classics. Then of course we do like news and major event coverage. So I'm not like talking about every single chess tournament as it happens, but when the big events come down the pike, the World Cups, the candidate cycle, I try to line up, you know, someone who knows the players inside and out, like Grandmaster David Howell or Grandmaster Daniel King, and we'll talk about. You know, we'll preview it and then give updates as the tournament goes along. Often I'll try to line someone up from the site. Obviously, we had a big news story in 2022 with the Hans Niemann drama, and that became like its own separate series on perpetual chess, covering that as it unfolded. Chess history, another personal favorite of mine. So sometimes that might be interviewing a prominent chess historian like Dr. Frank Brady, or John Donaldson, both of whom have written amazing biographies of Bobby Fischer. Some years ago, I interviewed a biographer of Grandmaster Kramnik. But even more than hearing what historians have uncovered about ancient chess, I love the living chess history that gets uncovered from interviewing legends of the game like Jan Timman and people who weren't necessarily top players, but maybe had encounters with top players like John Watson, who's legendary author in his own right, but was not like a grandmaster or an elite player, but he told stories of like going bar hopping with Mikhail Tal when he got a chance to meet him. And I love to hear these stories, these firsthand perspectives of what it was like to meet some of the legends of the game. Content creators, obviously, it's a lot of fun to talk to and to see the sort of stories develop of people who become chess YouTube stars and chess Twitch stars. Needless to say, 10 years ago, that was not a career that one could pursue in chess, and now it's become booming business for those who can, make names for themselves in what's a competitive field. So it's fun for me not only to hear their advice about someone like Levi Rosman, who I first interviewed when he had 10,000 YouTube subs, and now he's got 4.5 million. So I sort of feel like I've had like a ringside seat to see his evolution, and happy to report that in my limited interactions with him, the success really hasn't changed him. And in the people who listen to Perpetual Chess, obviously it's a passionate chess audience. So in addition to people interested in learning more about the game, in improving their own games, there's a lot of people who have their own passion projects related to chess. So it's fun to interview the people who've broken through and really found a large audience in chess. As I mentioned, I've interviewed a lot of chess educators like Elizabeth Spiegel, who's just an amazing teacher. But in addition to that, I've interviewed people who talk about like the chess business. I know there have been some UTD alums who've gone on to have a lot of success running chess teaching programs. I've interviewed a few people like Peter Giannatos down in Charlotte, who shared a lot of tips about how to make a sustainable and successful scholastic chess program. Adam Weisbarth, who has one of the biggest programs, it used to be called Silver Knights Academy in the Washington, D.C. area. Now I believe it's called the Magnus Academy. Also shared a lot of advice about that business/educating aspect of chess. But obviously, a lot of the teachers that you've interviewed, like David McAnulty, I mean, the work that they're doing, like touching the lives of kids is something that I try to touch on the podcast as well. I mean, obviously, you guys are incredible players and have devoted a lot of time to becoming great players. But the beauty of chess is that it can change your life without necessarily putting that much into it. And I love hearing the stories of kids who maybe don't have a lot of extracurricular opportunities who discover chess. And maybe they don't become grandmasters, but maybe it sets them on a more productive path that can alter the course of their lives. And then the biggest box here is the field of chess improvement. And when I started Perpetual Chess, that was actually not something I personally was especially interested in. I was already about age 40, and I had made USCF Master when I was 18, and basically my rating had only kind of drifted down since then. And I wasn't working that hard on getting better at chess, and there weren't a lot of chess podcasts at the time. At the time I was running school programs around Pittsburgh, and I just wanted chess entertainment when I was in my car, and I just noticed that there wasn't much. So that was the impetus for starting the podcast, but the more I did it, I found out people really wanted to know how to get better at chess, which I knew this to be true. Obviously, there's a lot of ink spilled on this topic in the history of chess, and these days a lot of sort of digital lessons and YouTube videos. But it turned out that adults in particular a lot of them felt stuck, and we're going to talk about why that is as we go on. I did want to give a shout out because this is sort of a field that's become of increased interest to chess aficionados in recent years. I may bear some responsibility for that, but there have been books related to it prior to Perpetual Chess coming along. So there was a book called Chess Master at Any Age that came out in the 1990s about a gentleman who started chess at 37 and made it to master, something like 15 years later. Rolf Wetzel, and trust me, that is not easy to do. There was a book called Rapid Chess Improvement. This guy, Michael de la Maza, basically was like a 1300 player who was working with grandmasters trying to get better, but they would give him these really complicated lessons about like weak squares and backward pawns and so on and so forth, and then he would go and he would just hang his pieces. So he felt like he wasn't being addressed in the chess marketplace, and he designed his own system involving a lot of flashcards and really drilling down on tactics and using spaced repetition. So this was in the early 2000s. Obviously, many years later, Chessable has built a business around the concept of spaced repetition. I'm not endorsing this book. I'm not that big a fan of it, but he was one of the first people to write about hey, no one's really writing about chess as I experience it, and to offer some practical, concrete suggestions. Dan Heistman, I have felt like he always, he's a longtime author and USEF master, and I always feel like he really understands the challenges that adults face as they try to get better and as they get older. And then, of course, I have a photo here of the legend, I am Jeremy Soman. How many of you, I know a lot of you guys are international, and you guys, you students, kind of grew up in the digital age, but how many of you have read a Jeremy Soman book? Okay, yeah, so quite an imprint considering how young you guys are. And yeah, he wrote, obviously, rest in peace, first of all. He passed away within the last year, which was tragic. He's got quite a legacy, incredible chess presenter, and really changed the paradigm in terms of how chess was written about in a much more conversational style, but also very direct. If you played a move that was dumb, he would annotate amateurs' games in books like The Amateur's Mind, and he would just say it's a dumb move. And I think in some sense, a lot of amateurs players appreciated the lack of sugarcoating. So he was direct, he was funny, and he changed the way that chess education was presented. And if you look at someone like Levi Rosman now, you can Levi wouldn't be doing what he's doing if someone like Jeremy hadn't written the books that he'd written. So then we get to what is the main topic of this presentation, which is how adults get better at chess. So as I said, when I started this podcast, this was not something that was really on my radar, but as the podcast found an audience and I started to interact with listeners, I found that this was something of a lot of interest. And then in 2018, this gentleman, Andres Kristois, made a post on Reddit saying, as you can see, this is the post you can still find online. He said, I was 2100 for 20 years, I'm 38. Last week I made an IM norm with a 2579 performance rating and gained 95 ELO. And basically just went through everything that he did to change his study routine. He got a coach for the first time. He started solving endgame studies. He said he always hated exercising, but he developed a fitness regimen. And there were just hundreds of replies to this Reddit post, and it got a lot of attention. And I just thought, this is a story I'd like to hear. So I reached out to Andres, and it turned out that he already listened to Perpetual Chess when he was doing his cycling rides through the woods of Poland. So I found that very serendipitous and really enjoyed Andres' story. So I interviewed him, and he shared his story. So I'm going to try to play a clip with him. Let's see if I can not screw up this tech. So this is a brief snippet of him sharing his story. Apologies again, this is from the early days of the podcast, so as I share more clips, the audio quality will get a little bit better. But here's what Andres said. He reached a sort of moment of exasperation that he wasn't getting better at chess, and here he is describing that moment.
From the beginning. So 3 years ago, I had decided that I want to do something with my chess because, I was getting beaten by young players, by, players that I thought I should be able to win. And I somewhere inside of me, there was this will there was this wish to get better at chess. So the goal at the beginning was just to have 2200. That was my original goal, to be just truly honest. But then I thought, well, no, that was my goal for forever, and it never worked. So maybe I need more bigger goals. So then I came up with this idea that maybe why don't I think about international master? But from the beginning, I think I wasn't lying to myself, and I thought this is impossible. Basically, it's just cheating myself so that I get to the 2200 at least. Mm-hmm. And somehow, later I kind of believed that maybe IM is actually possible, and now I think it's at least it's closer to reality than I thought 3 years ago. And the last 3 years was me improving in different ways, but the last 6 months I think I was getting better and more disciplined about it.
Okay, so basically he finally broke through after changing his routine, redoubling his efforts. He had a lot of success. Okay, it's still working good. So here's Andres' rating graph. A picture's worth 1,000 words. So his FIDE classical rating is the light blue line. So you can see he's just kind of flatlining up and down, up and down, up and down, and then finally has this jump. And the type is too small to read, but basically where he had that peak is about when I interviewed him. And as you can see, this is an up-to-date graph. He's continued to play since then, and he had a big downdraft after that. So, you know, not every success story is just like you're off to the races. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk in recent year about how the chess environment has changed. It's gotten more challenging. Kids are underrated, etc. So I'm sure Andres has had to deal with that as everyone else has. But in recent months, he's back on the incline, and he has a Facebook page called From 2100 to IM, where he still posts every time that he plays in a tournament, and he's still grinding hard despite all of the real life that can get in the way. So Andres' story really took off, and this showed me a few things because I sort of tried out this episode basically as a pilot to see if people were interested. So this showed me that there are a lot of adults who felt like they were stuck in their chess. They felt like no matter what they do, they can't get better, and they don't know what to do. You know, information overload. There's so many resources out there, but what do I actually study? Number two, obviously that is not true of kids. I mean, most of you here probably, for you, a plateau is like 1 or 2 years, you know? But as you get older, we're talking like 10, 15 years where you're working hard at your game and sometimes you just can't break through. But even beyond just chess improvement, because to me, chess is a much richer game than just trying to make the, you know, the number next to your name go up. They just liked hearing the stories of other amateurs. And to me, again, that's sort of the connective tissue of perpetual chess is really like, as you get older, as you either become a professional or move on and, you know, pursue chess on the side, what role does chess play in your life? And for some people, that's still an intense devotion to improvement, but for others, it's, you know, it can be getting involved in the community, it can be, you know, drunken blitz games, whatever it is, you know, you find the aspect of chess that you find enjoyable and try to do that. And lastly, it showed me that no one felt like they knew what to study. And as we'll be talking about, I actually feel like that's changed a little bit in the coming years. I mean, it's not for nothing that I've done 400 hours worth of interviews, and I feel like there's a bit of consensus about what people can study. So first, let's talk a little bit about the differences between adults and kids when it comes to chess learning. So kids learn relatively effortlessly. So, and this has been the experience, by the way, I mean, obviously I interview a lot of professional level players, a lot of grandmasters, but they often aren't as insightful for my amateur listeners about how to get better at chess, because they try to be as helpful as they can about a certain formative book they might have read, maybe a trainer who helped them along the way. But the bottom line is, if you look at the rating graph of someone like Hikaru Nakamura, I mean, it's like a Bitcoin chart, you know? It's just like straight up to the moon. So it's hard for someone like that to relate to the struggles of peaks and valleys and plateaus. So kids learn relatively effortlessly. They do compete over the board a ton. Obviously, in the online age, you have people like Nihal Cern who are also playing Blitz online constantly, and someone like Hikaru obviously was sort of the pioneer in that regard when the Internet Chess Club was just taking off. Life-wise, they have few distractions. You know, their parents take care of the logistics. If they're lucky, their parents take care of the finances. So they're lucky in that they can just show up and play. And the bottom line is that this often ends in improving quickly. Adults, meanwhile, have different circumstances. So they often obsess over what to study. They can't decide this book or that book. I'll play a clip that's related to that in a minute. They find it challenging to compete regularly. I have 2 kids at home. My wife works full-time as well, so I certainly can relate to that. I mean, it's no small feat to make it to a chess tournament. Whether it be on a weekend or a weeknight, you're either dealing with, setting aside family or household responsibilities, or possibly being tired from working all day. Not to mention some people just live in places where there is no place to play. So it can be a challenge when you don't have your parents chauffeuring you, or you aren't a part of a school program that arranges it for you. Adults are slower to assimilate information, especially as they get older. We'll be talking more about that in a few minutes. And the upshot of this is that they often struggle to improve. A recent guest of the podcast, again, getting to how I love to hear the stories of how chess touches people's lives, I interviewed Robert Ramirez, who's just started a YouTube channel in 2019, and he's already got 120,000 subscribers. And he's got a great story. I mean, his family moved from Cuba to the U.S. when he was 16, and he was pursuing chess in Cuba, but he wasn't like playing on national teams or anything. He was just like a good young player, and kind of on a lark, he got back into chess in the U.S., but he went to university. It wasn't like top of mind, but he started teaching a little bit of chess after graduating from college in the Miami area. It ended up becoming a full-fledged business, and then during COVID, since that business was slowing down, he started a YouTube channel, and lo and behold, he's a YouTube star. So Robert's done a lot of teaching, and he's taught both adults and kids. So here he is telling a story about the differences between adults and kids, if I can play this. Let's see.
I always tell my students working with kids and adults, the main difference is two things. Number one, kids, they do what I tell them to do. I tell them, hey, we're gonna do this and this and this. They just do it, they don't know any better. Adults, they're like, yeah, but I saw this guy on YouTube who says this. I read this book about strategy and it says this. And then what they never do, the main difference, and I always give this an example. I've gotten people who are dad and kid. Dad is like, hey, can you work with my kid? Yes. I also want to learn, fine. The kid, I work with him, and the main thing we do at the beginning is tactics. Get your forks, your pins, your mates in 1, mates in 2. We do that, let's say, for 2-3 months. The dad, in the meantime, is reading books on chess history, on strategy, is watching videos, is listening to podcasts, and they learn a lot about chess, but they never have that really struggle, the drills, they're doing the tactics, and then they play their kid 3 months, 4 months after, and they know more about strategy, the weak squares, but they miss a fork. Yeah. They miss a checkmate in 2 moves. And that's the main thing with adults.
One of the great gifts.
So as you can say, it's a lot different. Again, adults struggle more with information overload, whereas kids just immerse themselves in chess and actually often get better outcomes for that reason. Sorry, just got to bring it back to the slide. 1 sec. Okay. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So why is this the case? What changes that makes it so much harder for kids to get better at chess than adults? Well, there's been a lot of research about that. A lot of it, is fairly intuitive. A lot of you have probably heard about the concept of neuroplasticity, but basically, as you get older, it becomes a lot harder to learn new languages, learn to play a musical instrument, and improve at chess, as it turns out. So Dr. Andrew Huberman has one of the biggest podcasts in the world called the Huberman Lab, and he's written about this and devoted some episodes to the biological differences between kids and adult learners, how learning patterns change as you get older. So I tried to get him on perpetual chess, but he's a superstar, and I was unable to wrangle him, but I did rely on some of the stuff he's done and read some other neuroscience about the topic, and I've interviewed some cognitive scientists about this topic. But basically, around the age of 25, it becomes significantly harder to improve at chess, especially a particular aspect of chess. But first, I will play a clip from Dr. Huberman discussing how learning changes as you age. And this is from his podcast, episode 6, if anyone's interested.
Of childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood is that we can learn through almost passive experience. We don't have to focus that hard in order to learn new things. In fact, children go from being able to speak no language whatsoever to being able to speak many, many words and comprise sentences, including words they've never heard before, which is remarkable. It means that the portions of the brain involved in speech and language are actually primed to learn and create new combinations. What this tells us is that the young brain is a plasticity machine. But then right about age 25, plus or minus a year or two, everything changes.
So, I've seen this estimate, and it is just an estimate of the age 25, come up in other literature. It doesn't mean that your ability to improve at chess is going to fall off of a cliff, but it does mean certain aspects of chess improvement will likely become more challenging, and that will continue as the years go on. Sorry, again, I got to get back to the slideshow. Sorry for the tech issues. Sorry, I'm clicking on it, it's not coming up. Anyway, okay, there we go. So one of the cognitive scientists that I've interviewed several times and I've become personal friends with is named Dr. Christopher Chabris. He's also a USCF master, so he's a great person to talk to about this stuff. And he explained it pretty well in one of our interviews, which is basically there's one aspect of chess improvement that does not get more difficult and one aspect that does, and basically the difference boils down to what is called fluid and what is called crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence is stuff like the ability to do math in your head, retain multiple data points, calculate, and that's kind of what Dr. Huberman's talking about, and that peaks in your 20s. Crystallized intelligence is the ability to store knowledge. And it can be like vocabulary, it can be remembering opening lines, and that doesn't change as much. And even stuff like understanding positional concepts, stuff like that, you can continue to learn, well into your 50s and 60s. But the ability to just calculate seems to be strongly correlated with neuroplasticity and seems to peak in your mid-20s to maybe age 30. We don't know any of this exactly, but we know basically that directionally it's true. And I've experienced this myself, again, being in my 40s. I don't calculate quite as fast as I used to. And the other thing I notice is I'll just forget, I'll look at one line in a game. I'm about a 2100 player at this point. I'll look at a line in a game and then, look at a few other lines, and then I won't remember what I had thought about the first line that I looked at. You guys probably don't experience that much, those of you attending UTD, but that's what you have to look forward to in a couple decades. So Dr. Chabris, who's in his 50s and has described facing similar issues, even though he still competes often as well, said, our ability to learn is still quite good as we get older, and our ability to retain and use information is pretty good, but the fluid intelligence suffers in comparison. With all that prologue out of the way, what actually works for adults is the burning question. And before we get into it, I just wanted to give a shout out to a friend of mine, Todd Bryant. So some of this stuff, by the way, is discussed at length in my book, but Todd actually has kind of helped create what would be an addendum to my book because he's been doing independent research on this topic. So he's a software engineer for chess.com. He listens to Perpetual Chess from time to time, and he got interested in, given his data and computer science background, he said, I don't want to just hear stories. I want to actually gather data about what's possible. What kind of improvement can chess players make? So Todd did a ton of research using data from USCF rated players who'd made significant gains across different age brackets. I did an interview with him in episode 346 where he described what he found. He also wrote an article on chess.com called Can Adults Improve at Chess, which is a great summary and tells some great stories. And his data actually helped confirm what I had already sort of observed anecdotally from interviewing a lot of amateurs who've gained a lot of points. By the way, we have one in the audience here, Vishnu Warrior, who I interviewed some years ago. So in addition to UTD-affiliated people, Vishnu's made good progress and puts in tons of time despite a busy work and family life. So number one, they compete a ton. They find a way to play. So again, I don't sugarcoat it. It's not easy. I'm not saying the juice is worth the squeeze in a lot of cases, and a lot of times, you know, life just, there's more important things in life than finding your way to a chess tournament as the years go on. But if you do want to get better, the single best thing you can do is to play as much as you can, and of course to review the games and try to learn from them. I spilled water on my computer. You're not supposed to do that, are you? So a lot of these players might play in a chess hotbed like New York City. You know, being able to play at a place like the Marshall is obviously an amazing opportunity. J.J. Lang and Andrew Zinn were both in New York. Megan Chen, a kind of unique story. She's a software engineer who decided she wants to play in basically every state, and she has now played in all 50 states, but meanwhile she gained hundreds of points initially while she was doing this, and as we all do, she's been encountering a plateau subsequently, but I'm sure she will rise again. Philemon Thomas is a gentleman who's lucky enough to live in a small town, but with an active chess scene in Albany. So he was able to play a lot, and he made USCF Master something like a 12-year journey to go from like 1900 to Master. So that's the kind of consistent dedication it takes. And the people that Todd interviewed, also all played a ton. Thanks. I'll play a clip with Todd discussing that, of what he observed from looking at the graphs of these players.
And that was just a common thread that I noticed in all of these people. Like virtually every case is that when I looked at their rating graph, it was always immediately very jagged over the entire period, meaning that they were playing regularly the entire time. And frequently, these people were playing something like every weekend or every month at their local club. That seems to be another common theme to get the number of games in, probably without breaking the bank and having to do a lot of complicated travel.
Okay, so as Todd described, basically everyone who'd gained hundreds of points, all of the most accomplished adult amateurs, we're playing basically nonstop. And part of that gets back to some of Dr. Huberman's findings. He talks not only about adults learning more slowly, but he says that they need to learn differently. Whereas with kids, they learn effortlessly. Just play and the lessons will automatically come into your head. Like when I interviewed Nakamura, he was saying, I didn't read that many chess books. I played a lot of tournaments. I just constantly played on ICC. And obviously he's not like your run-of-the-mill chess talent. He's a once-in-a-generation genius. But and it does help that former Chess Educator of the Year, Sunil Weeramatri, was his stepdad. But he learned pretty effortlessly. He played a ton. He played a ton online. And just from iterating, he was able to get better. But as Dr. Huberman says, as we get older, we need to be more effortful. And one of the things he talks about is the need for a differentiated environment. So if you're just kind of clicking buttons on your screen as an adult trying to learn, it's harder to remember. It helps to actually go to a chess tournament and actually sort of sit across from someone and actually, if there's some opening line that you don't remember, to have that feeling of, oh man, I thought I knew this and I have no idea what to do. It's that sort of tangible feeling that then you'll go home and learn it and then you actually will remember. But when you're younger, you often can just play a blitz game, check a line, and you don't even have to review it later. It's just you're good to go. So, you do need to become more effortful. Another common trait I noticed is that they have a routine. Now, obviously, for working adults, the amount of time you can dedicate to chess, it will ebb and flow. But whatever you do with that time, they tend to be purposeful about it. Often it won't, you might have periods where you only do a little bit every day. I recently interviewed a guy named Dennis Markov who said he does his tactics over breakfast and studies more after his kids go to bed. Fred Wilson, who's now in his 70s, and was one of the few people ever to become an NM in his 70s at age 72, he talked about how he goes through chess games on a chess set, reading a book or a chess column every morning. Vishnu wakes up at 4 a.m., absolutely amazing. I could never do it in order to study chess. And they avoid the trap over obsessing over what to study, and they just do the work. And obviously Dennis here has an amazing graph, and he started, that's at age 38. So these are definitely the outlier cases, but there are stories of people who compete regularly, develop a routine, and actually see success. And then number 3, and this should hopefully is fairly obvious, but they love chess. You know, again, I don't think that getting better at chess as your life goes on, as your priorities change, I don't think actually the improvement of it necessarily has to be the way that you engage with chess in your life. But for people who pursue that path, it helps to really love it and to be more process-oriented than goal-oriented, to have intrinsic motivation, which is when you do an activity for its inherent satisfaction, rather than to have like a list of haters on your wall that you want to prove wrong when you gain those 150 points or whatever it may be. So just to tell a couple stories that were illustrative, Derek Wilder, who's a Scholastic Chess in Detroit, talked about spending all of his money to go to the World Open one year. He was just like, I don't want to miss it, you know, I tell everybody, when you play chess, you're doing it because it's something you love and it's a passion, and when you love something, the cost doesn't matter. My friend Max Farberov recently made NM after like 5 years of working hard, and he's pretty active on chess Twitter, as I am, and one thing I've noticed about Max is he's always following the most obscure tournaments all over the world. So it's one thing if you're following like Tata Steel or one of these top tournaments or the candidates or whatever it may be. But he's following like random open tournaments in like Spain and Bulgaria and just posting positions from them constantly. And he's not doing that as a method of study. It's just because he loves chess and he's curious about the game. So one last story I wanted to highlight is something that someone that Todd Bryant found through his research. So I've managed to interview a lot of sort of the outlier cases of adults getting better at chess, just kind of, sometimes they listen to the podcast or sometimes a friend of theirs is like, hey, you know, you're actually pretty unusual, and they'll try to put me in touch with them. Again, I try to not only interview people who've had these crazy gains because these are the exceptions, but Todd found a guy by the name of Michael Johnson, who he calls King of the Improvers. So Michael Johnson is from Kentucky. He started tournament chess at the age of 36 and was rated under 1,000. And sometimes when I interview people, they start with a low rating, but it turns out that they'd been playing online if they're younger, or been playing at home against a father or mother who was, an expert level player and starting to hold their own. So they might start with an artificially low rating in some cases and then brag about all these gains. But Michael was like a legit under 1,000, and he's been grinding for 20 years, and he peaked within the last couple of years at age 21 at a rating of 2135. And as Todd was saying in that clip, he plays at a local club. It's not like he's racking up the expenses, traveling all over the place. And he just shows a lot of curiosity about the game, always doing lively postmortems with his opponents. And Todd reached out to him online, and this is what Michael said. He said, I play chess because I love chess, and I really like all the friends that I've made over the years playing chess. Most chess people are really good people, and I'm grateful for all the friends I've made. My rating isn't the reason that I play chess. It's just a byproduct of doing what I love. So he's still on the grind, and find it super inspiring, people like him who are able to break through. And as I tried to sort of synthesize what I learned from these common threads, one thing that occurred to me is the people that I do interview who have the most success getting better at chess, they often have a childlike enthusiasm for the game. So yes, we don't have the neuroplasticity. Yes, we have more life impediments than kids in terms of improving at chess as we get older. But if we can retain a childlike passion for the game, I do think that that's one of the key differences, and that includes playing a lot. And you might not be able to fully immerse yourself in chess for 20 hours a week. Like when I was a kid, I went to Masterman School, which had like a national championship winning program. So we were automatically immersed in chess for like every minute that we're at chess club, which is like 6 hours a week right off the bat. And then you're going to tournaments on weekends. So it probably added up to 15 hours a week without even cracking a book. That's going to be tough for you to do as an adult. But the moments that you do chess, you're all in and you're enjoying it. And I think that that's something that kids do. They're not, again, getting back to Ramirez's quote, they're not obsessing over what they study, they're just enjoying what they do. And that's kind of what I think is a through line between how kids learn and how even the most accomplished adult amateurs learn. So again, a lot of this stuff is covered in my book, but not all of it. But those were the main points I wanted to make. So I would welcome questions if the timing works, Julio. Okay. Okay, who's going to ask me when I'm going to interview Magnus? Or who's going to hook me up with Magnus?
Well, I'll throw one out to get you started. So when I was a kid and started playing chess, the question would come up, what do you have to do to become a chess master? And the answer was, you got to play through 10,000 master games. You've heard this, right?
I've heard. I'm trying to remember. Was it Silman? I can't remember. Someone?
Yeah. And I've even had students that, that was their mission, and they kept track of how many games they went through. Well, to get 10,000 games done, I think if you did it all the time, 8, 10 hours a day, it'd still take you about 3 years to do that. But I don't know that anybody tried it recently.
Yeah, so when Jeremy Silman passed away, I'd read his books over the years, but I kind of did a deep dive into his legacy. I did a podcast about one of his books, Amateur's Mind, listened to a couple old interviews that he'd done, interviewed 2 of his good friends. I am John Donaldson and I am Cyrus Lakdawala. And I think that quote may come from him, because he said, he told a story about how when he was in high school, he would cut school and basically just study chess. And he said that in those years, he just played through games constantly. And as a result, in some of his interviews, and he might have written it somewhere as well, he gave that advice to study 10,000 games. Now, I have to tell you, John, I don't think that's the best way to get better at chess in 2024. Because another sort of theme that comes across in talking to neuroscientists and professional chess players and trainers and accomplished amateurs is the importance of active over passive learning. So for the same reason, you don't want to, watching YouTube is not the best way to get better at chess. Competing, you're making all the decisions. So competing is sort of the gold standard because you're navigating all phases of the game, opening, middle game, end game. You're feeling the feelings. You're not solving a puzzle in a lab without your nerves. You're actually dealing with your nerves and finding a way to manage the clock and everything that goes along with it. And playing through games can be very helpful, but you've got to make sure you're really involved and not kind of just mindlessly playing the moves. Gregory Kaidanov, one of the top trainers here in the US, is a big advocate of a way of studying chess called solitaire chess. Of course, there's a long-standing column by Bruce Pandolfini in Chess Life magazine. Basically, the idea, people call it guess the move. Basically, the idea is you cover up the move and you pretend like you're really playing. And Kaidanov says that he likes to really get into it. He says he'll study a particular player and he'll close his eyes and imagine that he's that player. And he'll pick players like Jan-Christoph Duda, top players, but not like Magnus Carlsen, not like one of the best players of all time. He just wants to understand the mindset of all the top players. And he actually uses a clock so that he's really simulating the conditions of a game. So I think if you're going through games that way, then it's a great way to study. But I think if you want to get the biggest bang for your chess study time buck, then I don't think, I had that book, 500 Master Games by Tartakower when I was a kid. I love that book. I ran it ragged. But I think that was, in those days, that was kind of all you could do. Whereas now I think that there's more targeted ways to learn. Yes.
Well, I don't exactly have a question related to the entire talk, but since in your presentation you also mentioned that you also have a history in your podcast, where did the chess nomenclature for different ranking came from? So I'm sure you might have covered that.
Different like chess titles or?
Yeah, Grandmaster, International.
That's a good question. Wow, you're putting me on the spot. And by the way, the questions do not have to be related to this presentation. If you just want to hear stories about any of the people I've interviewed, I'm happy to share. But where do the titles, I mean, I know that there was a FIDE Congress where they launched the title of Grandmaster. And there's something like 19 original Grandmasters. And obviously, some Grandmasters, Julio, are you one of the people who says there's too many GMs now? I mean, I know we've got a few GMs here, so, but my personal opinion is there are not too many. It's an amazing achievement. But yeah, I don't know the full history, unfortunately. Yes, Vishnu.
What's the hidden gem of like underrated chess website?
Oh man, the hidden gem of an underrated. Oh, Matthew Sadler's YouTube channel. I don't know if you guys are watching, but he's going through engine games. I mean, obviously he's a super genius. He wrote this award-winning book along with Natasha Regan called Game Changer that annotates the games of Alpha Zero. And these days, you know, let's not get it twisted. Computers are obviously the ones we can learn the most from. And Matthew Sadler, with his legacy as a British champion and top 50 player in the world, is also a very gifted teacher, and he just geeks out on all his favorite computer games and goes into great depth explaining them. So it's it's one of those things where it's like it's work. You've got to watch the video, you've got to pay attention, but to learn from the sort of seemingly effortless way that computers can play is I think the next frontier in terms of player development, and obviously that's true at the professional level in terms of how they study openings, but I think that it's something that's underemphasized inappropriately by amateurs as well. And yeah, I think it's called The Road to Silicon Valley because he wrote a follow-up book to Game Changer that looked not just at Alpha Zero, but more computer games, and now he's just updating it in real time as computers play more games. Did you have a question? Yeah.
What do you think is a good place to start actually going into neuroplasticity research?
Going into neuroplasticity research, I read a fun book called Live Wired by David Eagleman, who, aside from Huberman, is another Stanford scientist. I recently did a podcast about a book called Making It Stick. So this one is less about sort of actual neuroplasticity, but it's about the science of learning. And basically it turns out that like a lot of the, similar to chess possibly, a lot of the received ways that people were told to study was actually totally wrong. So they commissioned a study with some cognitive scientists in the early 2000s, and it turned out that just reading papers and sort of passively learning is not the best way to learn, and you're much better off actively drilling yourself with flashcards, taking a lot of tests. So I would recommend, I actually think the book Making It Stick is not so heavy on the neuroscience, but it's a good place to start, and if you go beyond that, then Dr. Eagleman's books are a good place to progress. And he's like a storyteller, so depending on how deep in the weeds you want to go, his are fairly accessible. Yes?
What differences have you noticed between adults and children of similar ratings? Like if you take a 2000 rated adult and a 2000 rated 13-year-old, are there differences in playing style?
The kid's better. But beyond that, so I wrote a chapter about this in my book, and I was a little hesitant to do it because it used to be that you really could stereotype. It used to be that, the received wisdom was take them to the end game. And that, I think, there's still a shred of truth to it, but just nothing is as true as they used to be. But, I mean, I do think kids are very booked up in the main lines. In their lines, and in E4 in particular, I feel like a lot of Scholastic players are started off with E4, so you can possibly gain a small edge by playing something that'll make them, want to be bored to death. So there are stylistic differences. They can be a little impatient. My experience has been, I feel like you can read their emotions a little better. They're just kind of like pure id when they play. So, you can sort of read the highs and lows of how they're playing and try to use that to your advantage. But all of this stuff, you could have given the same advice 15 years ago and then you might actually win. But these days now, they're just so tactically sharp that it's, you know, there's, whatever your age, if you're a great chess player, you're a great chess player. And I think it's amazing. I mean, I think despite the frustrations that adults might feel about like losing to people half their height, like I think it's incredible for the future of chess that we're collectively figuring out how to get better faster. And kids are sort of, whether they know it or not, they're at the vanguard of that. Anything else? Going once?
I had a lot of hope until that answer.
If you listen to the podcast regularly, you would have given up hope a long time ago.
No, I said Cicero now. Books, obviously, because, you know, that's what I grew up with.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chessable, I can learn a couple lines and you know, be able to combat a tricky game here and there, whatever. But if there was one or two critical electronic tools that I had to take a look at that popped to your mind after all these interviews that I need to adjust my learning style for, what comes to mind?
Critical, so for anyone who couldn't hear it, critical electronic learning tools that come to mind. You know, I'm a bit analog in the kind of approach that I advocate. You know, another thing that comes up in the scientific research is the importance of three-dimensional learning, the importance of engaging muscle memory when you're trying to learn. So a lot of both the accomplished adults I've interviewed, and even like when I interviewed Abhimanyu Mishra, who became the youngest grandmaster in the world, he's always playing through moves on a chess set. One of his trainers advised him that in the early days of his development, and that's been instrumental in the progress he's made. Even though he became like a Chessable junkie, there was a period where he was like, you know, doing it for 8 hours a day, but he was inputting it and doing it on the chess set. But the other thing that I would say, Bob, is it's not necessarily about some fancy tool, but the way that you engage with it. Like my friend FM Nate Solon, who's also a data scientist, so this sort of ties in with the scientific research, was saying that like when you want to learn an opening, yes, it's great to review the lines on Chessable, but in the science of learning, there's what's called the testing effect, which is basically like the idea of being forced to recall something on the spot makes you more likely to retain it in the future. So I actually think it's underrated. Nate suggested take a lead chess study, or you know, ChessBase if you're old school, and try to generate your entire opening repertoire from scratch in a given line. So you're not being prompted at all. Just say, okay, you know, I play the Moscow variation against the Sicilian. I'm going to write down every move I know, every branch of the opening tree. And what you'll find is it's really hard to generate it on your own. And I actually think that that's not super analog, but it is something like lead chess is certainly easier than a notebook. So, and obviously lead chess studies have so many, you can also play solitaire chess on lead chess studies. So there's, I mean, you can just get lost in them. And if you use that in conjunction with 3D learning with a physical chess set, then I think you're onto something.
My hope is back.
Good. Yes, Vishnu.
Yeah, as a fellow parent, how did you introduce chess to your kids?
Yeah, how to introduce your kids to chess. So I think I failed at this. So I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I taught my son when he was 5, and it's a big debate in parenting discourse whether you let your kids win or not. And you know, he knew I was a chess master and a chess teacher, so I felt like it would be kind of silly to let him win. So I just would win every game, and he.
Did you let him be calm?
What's that?
Did you let him be calm?
He likes playing my wife. Yeah, so that would have been better if she was playing him more often, and he still enjoys playing her. But he never got into chess. I mean, I did a few chess clubs at his school, and he would go to those. But I do think that, you know, it's one of those things where we might wish the world was a different way, but you are better off finding a way that kids can get some positive reinforcement early on. I have an interview coming up with a chess educator in New York named Carol Ann Coronia, who has a chapter about like how to teach kids. And you know, there's different variants. Obviously, you can just do handicap in terms of like what pieces, you know, you might start with like just a knight and 8 pawns and give give your kid all of, this is once you've taught them how to play, give them all the pieces. Or you can like have a rule where they can switch sides when they want, and then they'll be able to win. So, but basically, I do think that letting them win, finding a way for them to win is worth it if they're pretty young. And in terms of just the pedagogy of the actual teaching, just go slow in one piece at a time. And the Chess Steps series is a great resource, and they have two books called Stepping Stones that are designed specifically for kids that are a good place to start. But don't start with the pawn, start with the rooks and bishops and pawns, and save the knight for last. Okay, we all set? Okay, thanks a lot. This was a lot of fun.
Wow. Thank you again for sharing your research, insights, and lessons, and that message of keeping that love for the game. And thank you for educating us. Another round of applause to National Master Ben Johnson. And at this point, I would like to invite again Dr. Skinner to come up and present our Chess Educator Award to our honoree. Last thing, can we have the chess team members, Dean and the honoree, to have a group picture?